Our top story today, Nvidia's booming business. The AI darling knocked first quarter earnings out of the park. CEO Jensen Huang spoke to Yahoo Finance exclusively and had a lot to say about the demand picture.
Hopper demand grew throughout this quarter after we announced Blackwell. And so that kind of tells you how much demand there is out there. People want to deploy these data centers right now. They want to put our GPUs to work right now and start making money and start saving money. And so that demand is just so strong.
And the numbers match that narrative. Record quarterly revenue more than doubled from a year ago, largely attributable to massive gains in the company's data center business. Nvidia also announcing a 10-for-1 stock split. Here with more color from that exclusive interview, we have Julie Hyman. Julie, you spoke with Jensen. What were your biggest takeaways?
Yeah, Dan Halley, tech editor Dan Halley, and I had the chance to talk to Jensen a bit about the quarter that they had and what's coming next. And the comments that you just heard him make about Hopper and Blackwell are really key here. So that's my first takeaway. There are no pauses in orders. This had been one of the main concerns from analysts going into this report. With the next generation of chips and software coming out later this year, something Nvidia is calling Blackwell, there was a concern, well, would customers put a pause on the so-called Hopper chipsets as they're awaiting Blackwell? And Jensen pretty much said, that's not happening. That's why he was careful to say even after we introduced Blackwell, there was still strong demand for Hopper. So that's takeaway number two. Takeaway number one, I can still count despite my late night last night. Takeaway number two, demand is broadening beyond hyperscalers. What are the hyperscalers? It's the big cloud companies, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft's Azure. The company said in its press release that demand is broadening, that they're seeing other industries now like healthcare start to deploy these chips in their data centers as well. That said, still 40% of the company's data center revenue did come from the hyperscalers. But again, Jensen was careful to talk about the other industries that are using this as well. And then finally, he was also careful to push back against another concern of analysts and investors. And that has to do, guys, with the switch from so-called training to inference. In other words, right now, we're in the AI training phase. We're starting to get into inference. But in other words, these large language models are learning, for lack of a better term. They're being trained. Then it will switch to them actually working, to them making predictions, making links, doing the work. There had been some thinking that maybe these very complicated, very expensive NVIDIA chips wouldn't necessarily be deployed for that. But he said over and over again, our chips are being used for inference now. So really, a lot of what the work he was doing yesterday was sort of pushing back against some of these narratives, which was interesting.
It certainly is interesting. Julie, great interview there. It was a lot of great insight and color on the latest quarter and also what they expect to see going forward. What also stuck out to you was what he had to say about some of those real life use cases. And he was actually applauding some of the efforts that we've seen from Tesla, right?
Yes, he was. And within the data center business, aside from the hyperscalers, the biggest industry vertical, if you will, that is using these chips is automotive. And he called out Tesla specifically because of the training that it's doing for full self-driving and particularly autonomous vehicles broadly. This is what he had to say about that.
One of the things that's really revolutionary about the version 12 of Tesla's full self-driving is that it's an end-to-end generative model. And it learns from watching videos, surround video, and it learns about how to drive end to end and using generative AI predict the path and the how to steer how to understand and how to steer the car.
So in other words, there are videos that the models are watching. I mean, we keep using these human words, but as though they have eyes. But in other words, they scan through these thousands, if not millions, of different video scenarios to try to learn what to do in that situation. These GPUs that NVIDIA makes are powering that process at the data center level. And as he said, eventually we're going to have a lot more autonomous cars. So it's not just going to be a Tesla. It's going to broaden way beyond that.
Right. And just coming back to this report here for NVIDIA, I mean, the headlines are still, they're all glowing. What are you seeing as potential downsides here, though?
I mean, even though he pushed back against those various concerns, it doesn't mean that they're not valid. Sure. You know, there is still competition coming from some of these hyperscalers that are going to be making their own chips, as well as other competitors within the chip industry. That's something to consider. Within the report itself, gaming revenue did miss a little bit. The company said that had to do with seasonally lower GPU sales for laptops. So that's something to keep an eye on. And then there's just, you know, the bigger they get, the more they have grown, the harder the comparables are going to get on the out years. So if you compare, say, the first quarter of this year, in which we saw that incredible more than 400% increase in earnings per share, you compare it with estimates for its fiscal first quarter 2026, which will be this time next year, only looking for a 29% gain. And then actually that 2027 number should be a decline of 6%. In other words, analysts are predicting that growth is going to get smaller, and then a couple of years out will actually flip to a decline. The further away we get, the harder it is to predict, obviously.
Sure.
And him sort of emphasizing that inference will be a key use case for NVIDIA products maybe changes that narrative. There are certainly analysts who believe that NVIDIA's numbers will be bigger than that. But, you know, we're just going to have to see if it can keep growing at this incredible rate.
Incredible indeed. I mean, it got me wearing the leather jacket today.
I was going to say, we hit side by side of you and Jensen there. Who wore it better? It's going to be a tough one.
Definitely Jensen, but I tried.
It's time to shine. All right, Julie, thanks so much.